Hey everybody, welcome to the live cast and what is to be our final live cast of 2020. Thank you guys for staying with us all the last number of months. We've been doing these. It's been awesome. I want to thank you all for your questions. And I want to cover a topic today that I think is really, really relevant as we start the new year, which is how do you really kick your team off? How do you get them really turbocharged as they head into 2021? And the method that I always try to use with my teams and projects, and I want to encourage you to not only use, but I want to give you some, at least of some of my suggestions and best practices, are conducting retrospectives. So what is a retrospective? Well, at a high level, a retrospective is a term that comes out of Agile, but it can be used for anything. And it is a process of taking a look back at what has occurred, what has happened with your team, with a project, with a sprint. You know, some teams do retrospectives every week and they say, hey, how did our development cycle go last week, for example? Now, again, this is not what I'm talking about is not only for development teams, but just as an example, development teams say, how did it go last week? And they look at what happened and they look to continuously improve by having those regular check-ins where they take time out of their normal work and say, you know, what can we learn from what happened over the last period, whether it's a week or 2 weeks or a month or a quarter or whatever it is. This, I believe, to be a incredibly valuable thing to do. And I can think of no more important thing to periodically stop and do to make sure that you're learning as a team from what's occurred and thinking about how you can improve. Now, before I get into some of my detailed sort of tips and suggestions, I just really want to make a distinction. A lot of people use this term post-mortem. You know, very often I'll hear, oh, you know, this project went badly or this launch went badly or I'm having problems with the team. We need to do a post-mortem. We need to figure out what is wrong. And I want to suggest to you that you should banish this vocabulary from your operating process. And I want to tell you why it's the wrong idea. First of all, I strongly encourage you to conduct retrospectives, whether things are going incredibly well, incredibly badly, or somewhere in between. You don't want to reserve the process of stopping and asking the question, how can we improve, only for when things seem to be going badly. Why is that? Well, for one thing, there's always an opportunity to improve. So it makes zero sense to only focus on improvements when things are sort of unacceptably bad. And second of all, because you create the wrong tone for a retrospective meeting or whatever label you use, when you get people together and say, we're going to have a conversation about what happened and how we can get better. If the feeling is, oh, you know, it's kind of like, you know, as a kid in school getting called to the principal's office, you know, it's not very common. You're going to get called to the principal's office so he can tell you what a great student you are and how awesome you are. I mean, I'm not saying that's not possible. Never happened to me. But it's possible. But the odds are, if you hear that announcement when you're sitting in class in high school, Howard Chersky, come to the principal's office, you've probably done something not so good. So, you know, you don't want everyone walking into these types of meetings with the mindset of, here we are, we're going to get yelled at, we're not going to be appreciated, we're going to get told how we screwed up, right? Because that puts everybody in a negative state. And as soon as people are coming into a session of any type, any kind of meeting in that kind of state, you're probably going to suboptimize your results. They're going to be less interested in engaging in dialogue. They're going to be less interested in hearing what you have to say. They're going to be in survival mode. They're going to think, okay, I'm coming in. I'm probably going to get yelled at. The best possible outcome of this meeting is I just kind of get out of it unscathed, right? And that is absolutely not the mindset that we want people to have as we go into a session which is designed to help us improve. Rather, we want them to be thinking about, you know, this is going to be an awesome meeting where we're really going to get to do some things that are interesting, hopefully get some appreciation, and really come up with a way that we can all be even more impactful going forward. And doesn't that sound like the kind of meeting that you'd like to participate in? So let's talk about how to structure a meeting like that. Although I think the two most important principles, and I have a number of questions because I think the way you structure meetings like this is mostly by leading the team through a series of questions. And but I do think that it starts with communicating in advance to your team that you're going to have a retrospective, that you're excited about it, that you think that there's many things that have been great this year. You want an opportunity to really look back on what's been great and also talk about how can we even do better together? And so everyone is getting the right mindset to begin with. You don't want to begin by the most important thing you can do is set a positive tone. And you don't want to begin by setting the positive tone only when people walk into the meeting. Because again, if you're called to the principal's office and you're walking all the way there in a negative mindset, and then you walk in and it turns out to be a positive thing, you're like, oh, whoa, wait, you're already in this negative place versus coming into the meeting positive. And then, of course, you also want to introduce the meeting with a very positive mindset as well. Because no matter how bad things may be going, and I hope things aren't going badly for you, but even if they are, you don't fix them from a negative place. You don't fix them from a state of focusing on what's wrong. Not really, at least not to begin with. And in fact, one of the most fundamental principles, as you'll see in the questions, especially the first questions, are to really try to start with what's right, to start with what is working well, because it's always more effective with teams to build on what's successful and appreciate what's good, even if 90% is bad, and again, I hope that's not your situation, than it is to start with what's negative. So we're going to talk about that in a second. But one fundamental principle is to just keep it positive. But I just want to be clear, positive doesn't mean you only talk about the good things, as you'll see from the questions. That's not what I mean by positive. Positive means that you start with appreciation for all their hard work, and you start with an assumption that everyone is doing their best, and that we all want to do great work together, and that we have an opportunity to figure out how to continuously improve. And that, start with that kind of positive mutual assumptions. And then the other principle that is really, really important in retrospectives is to let the team speak. The whole point of these types of sessions is not to bring everyone in, and if you're the leader, for example, for you to tell them what they need to do better. You can always choose to do that, but that's not the kind of session that I'm talking about here. The kind of session I'm talking about here is one where you bring everyone together and you find out from them the opportunities to improve and what's going well and all that. And I'm going to show you the questions in a second. Because first of all, the people who are on the ground doing the work every day probably have some insights that you may not have. And if you're looking to improve, you as the leader, and I'm speaking to you, assuming you are the leader, you may or may not be the leader, but the reality is that everybody on a team has a different perspective, right? If you have a developer, if you have a marketing person, if you have an operations person, if you have a legal compliance person, if you have a money person, an advertising, whatever it may be, right? Obviously, different types of teams. And everyone's got their own perspective. And so the purpose of this is really to make sure we get that perspective, not just so that everyone feels heard, which is a good thing too, but because, they may be able to point out ways the team can improve that other people wouldn't have thought of because they don't see that angle on it. So those are the two key principles that I want to encourage you to follow for the entire meeting. And what I'm going to give you now is a set of questions that I would encourage you to use to drive the meeting. But those two principles again are keep it positive and let the team speak. And if you're the leader and you're going to say something, I would encourage you to speak, but speak last. So you don't sort of set the answer and then everyone kind of feels like they have to agree with you because you're the boss. Or if you're running a meeting but you're not the most senior person there, then I would encourage you to have that conversation with whoever that is and make sure that if the boss is in the meeting, that they understand that, hey, this is really about getting the team to speak. This is about being positive, that they're in on the strategy. And sometimes it's better not to have the big boss in the meeting either, but to use this as a session for the folks that are actually on the team, so to speak. This is an activity for the team. All right, so let's get into some of the discussion questions. And I would encourage you to send these questions out in advance because, again, you want to make sure that you're setting a positive tone for the meeting. And you also want to give people an opportunity to think a little bit in advance so that they can kind of come prepared to discuss these topics, because giving them a day or two to reflect on these things may lead to a much higher quality meeting. So what are the questions? The first is a very simple and non-judgmental question. What were our goals for this year? Now, I say this year on the assumption that you're doing a retrospective focused on 2020 because we're about to enter 2021. But of course, you could be doing this for a quarter, you could be doing this for a week or whatever period. But let's just say you're doing it for the year. What are we trying to accomplish this year as a team? And, was it clear? Was it not clear? Did you have clear goals? You may not have even had clear goals, but even if you didn't have clear goals, you must have had some kind of goals. There was some reason you were spending money, some reason you had people working together on a team. So what was it we were trying to accomplish? What would have been our definition of maximum success if we had set it at the beginning of the year? And maybe you did set it. Maybe you knew exactly what it is, $10 million in sales, or to finish release 3 of your software product or whatever. Maybe that was super clear, or maybe it wasn't clear, but just get that out there. And again, you want to start this without it being about anything. This is not positive. This is not negative. This is just neutral, right? What were our goals for the year? And it's great. Again, you might think, well, that's a clear, obvious thing, what the goals are. I, as a leader, can just remind everybody what the goals are. But actually, I think it's better to throw it out to the group, because it'd be very interesting to see what the group's perspective is and what the individual on the team think the goals for the year were. And maybe they're all going to say the exact same thing, and it's clear that everyone had the same idea. Or maybe you're going to hear some interesting things, or maybe you're going to hear some lack of clarity. And if that's something that you're hearing, it suggests that, that's something you could sharpen up in the new year. The next question is, how do we do against our goals? Now, it's good to have some stats and numbers with you if you're on a team that has something that's kind of a quantifiable measure. But I would still, again, turn to the team. How do you guys think we did against our goals? And very often teams have both soft and hard goals, right? For example, one goal might be to learn as much as possible about advertising on TikTok, right? And another goal might be to drive at least $5 million worth of sales. Well, obviously one is very measurable and one is not so measurable, but in both cases, it's valuable to hear what the team thinks. First of all, the soft items really are quite subjective. It's good to know how they feel. And secondly, on the hard objective ones, again, it's interesting to hear what's their understanding of how well you are or are not achieving your goals. Hopefully, I'm hoping for you that you've blown past your goals. But if so, do they know that? Do they even know? Sometimes you have people working on a team and they have no idea, right? Their job every day is to just do the QA. And if our goal was to achieve $5 million in sales, nobody even told that person. So there's a great opportunity to share that information, both positive or negative, right? Or both. I won't even say positive, negative, because it implies that there's a certain emotional tone to it. But really, it's just information, right? Our goal was $10 million in sales this year, and we got $8 million in sales. $8 million is a lot of money. It's not $10 million, but and so what other goals do we have? Well, our goal was to learn more about TikTok advertising. Okay, we actually learned quite a lot about that. Let's just go through, not in an emotional way, but just in a factual way, or non-factual if people have the wrong information. It's interesting to hear that too. But I'm just saying the goal here is to just be, just clear and specific about what were the goals and where are we relative to the goals. And try from your own perspective, not to telegraph any negativity here as well. You want to start off on a positive state, but you want to start off with the facts. If your goal was 10 million in sales and you got 8 million in sales, it is what it is. Great. And we're here to talk about that. The next question is really important. And, I would even suggest to you, if you want, you could even put this as question number 1, because you really want to get people off on the right foot, especially if you've had a bad year. If you've had a great year or even a pretty good year, if you're supposed to hit 10 million in sales, you hit 9.5 or you hit 10.5, then I think starting with the goals is great. If you're supposed to hit 10 million in sales and you hit $500,000 in sales, maybe you actually want to start with question number 3. What were things that went especially well that year? No matter what's going on or no matter how many problems you are, something is going well. I assure you, something is going well. So let's start there. What was going well and what caused them to go so well? Why are we doing so well in this particular area? Maybe we missed on our sales, but we did a great job of reorganizing our source code, or we learned a lot about something, or we have cleaned out our mailing list, or whatever it is, right? What went well and why did it go well? Was it because of the team? Was it because of the assets and the resources? Was it because of the leadership? Whatever. Talking about this, and you want to make sure you really leave time to don't gloss over this, because first of all, as I said earlier, you're going to build on success. So identifying what was successful is really important, and don't gloss over the what caused the good things to go well, because you may find later we're going to get to challenges, right? So don't worry. We're not going to only talk about what went well, but we're going to start here to put people in a positive frame of mind, but for a second reason, which is you may find that if you look at the things that didn't go as well, that if you look at what you did for the things that did go well, if you did some of those same things around the areas that didn't go as well, that might be a way to improve. If you say, well, we did a great job in improving our email targeting strategies. Well, what made that go so well? Well, we sent the team to a class. We got them training. We bought them the right tool for the job. We let them pick the tool that they thought would make them successful. And it did. And then therefore they felt ownership. I'm just making stuff up here. And so those are some of the reasons why that went well. Okay, let's look over here. What about our e-commerce platform? that we just implemented. That didn't go so well. Why not? Well, did we give the team training? Did we let the team pick the platform? And by the way, it doesn't necessarily mean that the same methods apply to every aspect of your business. I'm not promising you that in every case, if you just do the things that cause one area to go well, in the area that didn't go as well, it will get better. Maybe not, but at least it's a question to ask. If we didn't try the same things, maybe that's something worth trying as we're trying to improve those areas. So those are a couple reasons why talking about what went well is important. Now, before we move on from this really, really important question, I want to warn you about a problem that I have often observed that teams have, including leaders of teams have, when talking about what went well. There's one really, really dangerous word that you want to sort of banish from the what went well discussion. And that is the word but, because a lot of folks are going to want to sort of, have a mindset of like, okay, let's get to the brass tacks. Let's get to the actionable stuff. Yes. We improved the email list. We cleaned it out, but we still haven't been able to get a good email open rate, and we still have a lot of unsubscribes to our email list. Well, now you've just started to talk about some of the problems and challenges that you're having, and we're going to talk about that, but we're going to talk about it a little later in the retrospective. So if you're running the retrospective and you want to do this in a fun way, but you want to kind of warn people up front, hey guys, first we're going to talk about what went great. And I really want you to contain your remarks to what went great. And people are going to probably be naturally inclined to start to give sort of a short shrift to what went great. And you could almost hear it in someone's voice. Yes, we did this. But the real problem we still have is X. Well, first of all, you've just verbally kind of dismissed the good stuff, right? You haven't really acknowledged and given it real appreciation because you said it in a way that suggests that the good stuff is not really the important part. The important part is that we still have problems. And so really the good section of this meeting can still become negative if you let that happen. So I would encourage you to coach those in the retrospective about the importance of this section, focusing only on what's good. And don't worry, if you have something else to say about emails that is more of a challenge, we will talk about that later. But just because you've got the floor and you're talking about emails, don't just talk about everything you want to say about emails. Initially, we're just going to focus on what's good. And by the way, this is great training for a team anyway, because in general, when interacting with people and making teams work well together, acknowledging what's good and appreciating people for what they do, what's good, is really, really important. And if we have the habit, possibly even subconscious habit, of every time we go to someone to tell them something they've done well, but we always undercut it by saying, you did a great job in setting up the email. Unfortunately, it didn't go out on time. So, I guess we really didn't get the benefit. Well, you really haven't acknowledged what they did well. Not really, because you've just undercut it. It's much better to separate them and really let the acknowledgement of what is good stand alone and say, listen, this was great. You did an awesome job on this part. Period. Right? Now, on another matter, let's talk about the timing, right? And then go on to that. But in this case, we're not even going to connect them that closely, because we're going to first let everybody have an opportunity to share what was good. And then later, as you'll see in the questions come, what was good and why, what caused it to be so good. And then we're going to move on. And I really do think it's important that you allow enough time for this retrospective so that everyone who wants to speak can speak. You kind of encourage people to be concise, right? Briefly tell us what was good. We don't want someone to filibuster and take 20 minutes talking about one thing. So you want to be mindful of the time, but you don't want to schedule such a short period of time that you can't really address each of these things meaningfully, especially if you're only doing this annually. Maybe you need a couple hours, to bring everyone together, get some lunch or whatever, and really make sure that everyone who wants to say something about these things has the time to speak. So if you've already spent 20 minutes just talking about what's gone well, then you have the space to start to say, okay, now let's talk about some of the challenges that we encountered. Oh, I want to mention one other thing about the what went well. It's great to make these sessions fun. I always believe people do their best work when they're having fun. And so one of the things we've done sometimes is done things like get Nerf darts or other things or something so that if somebody accidentally during the positive section of the retrospective trails into the negative, we have a way of reminding them. We make a funny face or we play a funny sound or we throw nothing that will harm people, but we throw Nerf balls at them or something, right? So that there's this reminder, because it's a natural mistake to make. It's almost one of those automatic things to do. So you might want to create some kind of fun model where you say, hey, everybody, we're going to keep an eye out for each other. We're going to make sure we don't do this. If you do, this is the feedback you're going to get, squirt guns or whatever seems appropriate and acceptable within your work environment. Okay, so then what were some challenges we encountered? Why did we encounter them, and what did we learn? So first of all, we try to characterize this as a challenge, because a challenge feels like something a little bit external. Now, it may or may not have been external, but anything can be described in an external way. Here's what I mean, and why the language of these questions is so important. Because you could also ask this question, where did we screw up? And why are we such losers, right? Like, you could ask that question too, right? But that's not a good question that's going to keep people in a positive, resourceful state. That's going to cause people to just shut down, right? Well, I don't think we screwed up. You don't understand. It wasn't so easy to do what you asked to do, right? You don't want people to go into a defensive mode. So, okay, we're starting not to talk about our failures. We're talking about the challenges that we encountered. And by the way, some challenges you encounter, you overcome successfully. So if one of the challenges that you encounter was that our server went down for 2 days and we lost a ton of sales, but we got it back up after 2 days, and we got some of those sales back by emailing our customers and letting them know, well, that's bad. That's bad, right? That's not something you wanted to happen. That was a challenge. So you certainly want to acknowledge that it was a challenge, and you certainly want to ask, why did we encounter it? For example, because we didn't properly back up the server, or because we let the server, not be properly maintained in some way, or because we didn't have a redundant server, or whatever, right? Because of course we don't want it to happen again. But to the degree you met and overcame that challenge, you want to acknowledge those things as well and say, listen, what's great is we did get back online after 2 days, and thanks to everybody for all the hard work and all the late nights, or whatever it may be, right? So even in the area of what's wrong, you want to acknowledge that even within the areas that didn't go so well, there was probably good work in overcoming those challenges. And then, the key question is, what did we learn? And of course, the goal of the whole retrospective is to really answer that question. What can we learn from what happened in the past year? Because, some people would take the mindset of, why do we want to look backward? Why, we don't want to spend our whole life looking backward. Let's just look forward. That's a good mindset. I certainly don't think you want to wake up every morning thinking about all the mistakes you made last year. I absolutely not. But it's certainly valuable to periodically set aside time and say, let's take a look at what happened over the last period of time and ask the question, what can we learn? So that's the goal of this whole exercise. What can we learn? So certainly when we look at challenges we encounter, we want to answer the question, what did we learn? And if you're facilitating this, I want you to really prompt people with that question, because sometimes people will just, if they start to move into this being a bitch session, well, what were some of the challenges? Well, IT sucks. That was one of our challenges. They never do anything right. It's like, okay, first of all, we want to encourage people not to use, that kind of language, right? To start with the assumption of respect and positive intention. So you want to set that up front as a kind of a sort of a foundational expectation for the meeting. But then you want to be specific. The challenge is not that IT sucks. The challenge might be that it takes IT 3 to 4 weeks to implement our changes every time we ask for them, or usually when we ask for them. And that's slow. That's very slow relative to the speed that our customers expect improvements. Okay, that's a challenge, right? And why do we encounter that challenge? Well, maybe we encounter it because we only have 2 IT people and we have 15 people asking them for help. So what did we learn? Maybe we learned that 2 IT people can't keep up with the demand, or maybe we've learned that we don't have the right skills necessary in IT, or that IT doesn't have the right tools and resources. This is the good stuff, right? This is the valuable stuff, not judgment, not just negativity, but saying, okay, we have a challenge and maybe we've partially overcome that challenge, and what do we learn about that so we can keep overcoming it? But what can we do to minimize that challenge in the future? And again, you can see how these are meaty questions. You can see how our team could speak for a long time. And it's good to have a whiteboard or some other ways. You definitely want to be taking notes. In fact, what I would encourage you to do is if you're the person who's going to facilitate this conversation, ask someone else to be the person who's writing this stuff down on the board to make sure everything is being captured. That's also going to encourage people to participate more, because you really want people to feel like there's a purpose in this. Why are we doing this? We're going to write all this stuff down, and at the end, we're going to make an action plan of some things we're going to change and improve in the new year, because we're committed to continuously improving. So you want people to feel like this isn't just talk. We're not just here to just sort of chew the fat and talk about the last year, but to actually, from this conversation, get to some specific things that we want to either make sure we continue to do because we did them really well, or challenges that we want to try to avoid in the future. Or, some challenges aren't avoidable, right? Some challenges are completely external. In which case, when you're talking about challenges, maybe you have a challenge like one of our suppliers all of a sudden at the last minute wasn't able to fulfill the order that they committed. And, it wasn't anything we did, right? It wasn't our mistake per se, but nevertheless, it created a big challenge. We weren't able to give customers the product they were expecting. So what did we learn? And then, what we're going to be asking ourselves is, what can we do to avoid that in the future? Maybe we need backup suppliers, maybe we need a different method when we sell products so we don't commit to customers product that's not been sent to us by suppliers yet, et cetera, right? Obviously, the potential variations on this are many, but the goal is to, again, acknowledge things as challenges, not as failures or not as something that's personal. We want to make this not personal. And even if it's, a challenge is people kept asking me to, come up with a new privacy policy, but the one that I came up with turned out to be illegal and caused us to get a $100,000 fine. Well, that sounds like my failure, but maybe the real problem is I didn't have the knowledge and information I needed to write a privacy policy. I didn't have the right background. I didn't have the resources. I didn't have access to an attorney to help review it. I didn't know how to do it, or I didn't have the time to do it, or whatever. Again, it's not about anybody's failure. It's about a challenge and whether the challenge was successfully or unsuccessfully overcome or partially successfully. And what did we learn? Because the end of all this is going to be, what do we want to do differently? And so let me just go to my next slide here. So that leads us to the last couple of questions. And you can see how just these few questions could fuel a lengthy conversation, depending on how large your team is. And also why it's helpful to have them out in advance, because hopefully they set a positive expectation of the meeting and they give people a chance to think. Maybe people come in with some notes, etc. Then what are a few things that we want to try doing differently next year or next quarter or next week or whatever period of time you're focusing the retrospective on? Maybe one of them is to have more frequent retrospectives, right? Not wait a year before you do this kind of process. But I'll underline the word few, because sometimes when you go back and look at everything, it's easy to conclude you have a list of 30 things that we need to change. And that can be overwhelming, and also demoralizing if you feel like we need to change everything. And, meanwhile, we got to keep going, right? Like we have projects due, we have customers, whatever the nature of this team is. We can't stop everything for 3 months and retool. At least you probably can't. And so we don't want to overwhelm everybody with deciding to do so many things that it's unrealistic. And now we're going to fail at something else, right? We're going to fail at the improvements. So we want to prioritize. And so a key topic of discussion for the group is, if we were just going to pick a few things, if we learned a bunch of things we need to do, is it we need certain training? Is it we need certain tools? Is it we need to change a certain process? Is it we need to change certain expectations? I mean, it could be a lot of different things. But what would be a manageable number? And I don't know what a manageable number for your team is, but like 3, 4, 5 things we're going to focus on, not 12, not 27 things, etc. And then also, how can the team be better supported? So often when a team is not performing at its best, there are ways that team could be better supported. And I'm not against holding people accountable, by the way. I do think that people need to be measured and held accountable. But these retrospectives, they are not mainly for accountability. That's, I believe, should be done a little bit more on an individual by individual basis. It's challenging when you hold the whole team accountable. It's good if the team feels accountable, right? As a team, our goal is to accomplish this, $10 million in sales this year. That's a great thing. But then, if you have some people on the team that are absolutely operating at a 10 out of 10 in terms of performance, and yet the team doesn't achieve their objectives and they feel personally held accountable, that can also be a negative thing. So what I would really encourage you to do is think about accountability as something that you're probably doing, particularly if it's negative accountability, meaning, you're not delivering, you're not performing at the level expected. That's more of an individual conversation and not something to do as part of a team retrospective. The team retrospective is more about thinking about how can the team do better working together. And then this idea of how can the team be better supported? Because, sometimes these are questions that just don't get asked. What can we do to better support you as a team? Is it giving you more time to get your work done? Is it giving you a different tool? Is it giving you a different process? Are there roles that you're missing that are important, I see this sentence isn't even finished on my slide, apologize for that, but that would, are there roles that would enable the team to function in a more effective way? So you want to be asking these questions. Of course, it doesn't mean you can give everything that's asked for necessarily, but you want to get that dialogue going. First of all, to indicate that there's a desire to provide. It's not all about telling the team, you guys need to do better next year. I expect more from you. It's like, well, it's having high expectations is good. A lot of people like to work someplace where there's high expectations, but it also means that we need to be willing to give teams what they say they need, up to a reasonable point, of course. If team says, I need 6 weeks to write one email, I mean, that's not reasonable, obviously. But to hear out what are the challenges that they're facing. And I have to say that as a leader, if you're a leader of a team, you should go into a session like this expecting to learn a lot. Your goal is not to lecture the team. Your goal is to ask questions, keep it positive, coach the team on how to interact in a retrospective, but then hear what they have to say, because you may learn a ton. And you may realize, for example, that some of the things that perhaps you sometimes blamed the team for are actually either your responsibility, your fault, so to speak, or they're solvable problems if only you understood them in this detailed way that you could fix or at least substantially ameliorate through, again, what is it? Resources, training, budget, tools, software, outside expertise. Obviously there's so many different types of topics, but that's what you want to know. So you can also walk away from this and think, okay, the team, we want to facilitate the team's conversation to say, as a team, what do we think we need to do differently? Maybe we need a different way of scheduling our work. Maybe we need a different way of communicating. Maybe we need a commitment to make sure that we're all sending Slack messages to each other when certain things occur or whatever. Again, whatever it will be, I would let the team figure that out. This isn't the time for the boss to dictate things. There's plenty of forums for the boss to dictate things. This is an opportunity for the team to talk about what they would like to do differently. But also, if you're the leader, I would encourage you to be sitting in this meeting thinking, what do I want to do differently myself? How can I support this team even better? And by getting more understanding and more empathy for what the team is dealing with on a daily basis, which you only get when you're able to get real, genuine conversation going where people don't feel defensive, that can be super valuable and give you your own little mini list that you might want to write down, which you could share with the team and say, you know what, I took from this, you guys are going to do those 5 things differently. If I'm the leader, I can say, what I heard from all of this is a few things that I want to do differently. And this is what I'm going to do differently, which you could tell them at the end of the meeting, or you could wait and, think about it and then come back to them next week and say, hey, listen, I really appreciate everything you guys said at the retrospective. And I thought a lot about it. And here's a few things that I'm going to do differently. So they really feel some action is being taken. So hopefully this is useful. I try to be very detailed. Your retrospective may only go 45 minutes. It may go an hour and a half. I've probably talked for 45 minutes here, but I really wanted to give you some of the nuances because it's very easy to bring people together and say, well, let's do a postmortem and talk about what went wrong this year and have it be a very unproductive negative meeting, or do it in a different way and have it really be the turning point that turbocharges the whole year or the whole quarter or whatever period of time you're focused on. And it can actually be something that people become addicted to and say, we really want to do this often. We want to get together regularly and look at what we're doing and figure out how we can keep doing things better and better. And if that's the kind of response you're getting, then you're doing it right, because that's really the way we want people to view these. Because what do you want from a high-performing team? You want a team that's always asking the question, how can we do more? How can we do better? How can we continue to improve? So hopefully that's useful to you. Hopefully that's something that you can apply and will help you turbocharge your work with your team in 2021. If you've got some downtime, I want to remind you that if you haven't caught up on all of our live casts, actually, I'm going to give you several things if you have any downtime over the holidays that you can do. There's a great page on LinkedIn that is, I think you don't even have to log into LinkedIn to see it, I don't think, that is a list of all of the live casts we've done. I think there's almost 25 of them. Caitlin, if you wouldn't mind putting that URL up, there you go, wdc.ht/livecast. Also, I have a podcast. Mostly on these live casts, I'm kind of talking to you about things that I think are useful. On my podcast, I'm interviewing leaders in digital transformation, like the CIO of the NBA or the CIO, also the CIO of the NFL, interestingly, 2 top sports leagues, but also the president of Foot Locker and a lot of other leaders who have led digital transformations. And Caitlin, if you wouldn't mind putting up the link to the podcast. Oh, there you go. WDCpodcast.captivate.fm. Or you can just look for the Winning Digital Customers podcast wherever you, Spotify or Apple or whatever. But this is one place that I think links to all of them. So that's convenient if you want that. And then, of course, the book, Winning Digital Customers, which just came out in Kindle a couple months ago, is a Wall Street Journal bestseller and is available in hardcover now, if you buy it from my site or on Amazon. I believe they're shipping it on January 4th or thereabouts. And so you can go directly to Amazon and look for it, or you can go to WDC. What is it again? Oh, I think if you go to Winning Digital Customer, there you go, WDC.ht/pre-order. It's available for a special pre-order price, and you can get that hardcover shipped right out to you. So I say all this because in case you have some downtime over the holidays and you're like, how can I get more of that good stuff I get from Howard's Livecast? If that's what you're thinking, I don't know how many people are thinking that, but if you're thinking that, there's lots and lots of places to get more stuff, and there's some options for you. So my very best to you and your families and your teams. We will be off next week, so the next Livecast will be in 2021. It's not weird to say, which hopefully will be an awesome year for all of us. I know 2020 has been for many a challenging year, but you know what? Many people have also had many challenges, and their teams have figured out how to overcome them. So when looking back on 2020, as we've been talking about, of course, many challenges, but you know what? That's when heroes are made, right? So the opportunity to really acknowledge people for the things that they've accomplished, even in these difficult times, hopefully has trained us up to be even better in what we are hopefully the good times ahead. So have a wonderful new year. Happy holidays to everybody, and I will see you all in 2021.